Hi, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Wholehearted Loving. I'm Steph.
Hi, I'm Georgiana.
So, today we're going to talk about a bit of an expansion of the love conversation we were having last week. And Georgiana has a sweet story to start us off, but we're going to first do a body practice. So, we're taking a moment to arrive with ourselves and our bodies before we arrive with each other and with this podcast.
All right. So, as usual, finding your anchoring point. Maybe it's your butt on the seat, maybe it's your feet on the ground. And we're going to use our hands for this practice. And we will place one hand on your heart and just be there for a breath first. Feel your hand there. And place the other hand on top of your head. And just feel that other hand on top of your head. And just notice how that feels for your body. I like this practice just for how it feels. But if you want to take it a little bit further for the symbology of one hand on heart, one hand on head, it's like for those moments where you feel that your mind and your heart are battling each other. And sometimes you don't know which one to listen to. And this is a thanking of both. Thank you, mind, for trying to protect me and give me the answers. Thank you, heart, for trying to protect me and give me the answers. I'm learning to listen to you both. And then when you're ready, let your hands rest to wherever it feels good. And always follow your body's impulse for any movement after these practices.
I needed to connect with both individually before I could share the space.
That's good to notice too.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's never about following the instructions 100% or perfectly. Some people will say, am I doing it right? There's no right. Do what feels right for you in the moment and go from there.
Okay, so we had a pretty sweet conversation about love and all the ways that we do or don't recognize love last week. And there's a story that you wanted to tell, and I love this story about your mom and fruit.
My mom and fruit, and it's a story that it has been years, like decades in the making to come to this moment that I realized, wow, all of this work and dedication and focus on healing old wounds, learning to be kind and gentle to myself, learning to really accept all the parts of myself, they paid off. Because sometimes you do this work and you wonder, like, is anything actually changing? I don't actually see any concrete evidence that my life is better. And it can be so frustrating and confusing. And I had something happen, I'd say almost 3 years ago now, maybe 2.5. That was this huge smack in the face in a nice way. That was like, this stuff works. This work you're dedicating your life to in practicing yourself and in teaching other people, it works. So I'm going to share that story later throughout this podcast. First, I want to share a smaller story about love and recognizing love. So this is something that just happened recently because it was Valentine's Day this week, last week, this week. And Valentine's Day morning, I had a nice snuggle in bed with my youngest. And he came in bed and we snuggled and we just talked about how nice it felt to start the day with a snuggle. And I'm really cautious because I'm such a snuggler and I love snuggles, but I want to make sure my kids aren't offering me that because they feel like they have to. Right. And I checked in with my guy. He's like, no, I want to snuggle, mommy. So So great. We had a nice snuggle. And then later in the week, we were talking in the car, maybe on the drive to school. And we were talking about how different people show love in different ways. And we were talking about how my youngest likes to snuggle. And my older one, he's turning 13 in just over a month. He said, yeah, and I like to use my words. And he said, like, I love you muchy, muchy more. And it was so sweet because some time ago, I said to him, I said, I love you. He said, I love you muchy, muchy more. And he just made that up. And it's just such a sweet moment that we shared together. And he will bring that phrase up occasionally. But what was really sweet about it was that in that moment when he said that in the car, it was like he knew I just show love differently than my brother. And
Mm,
that's okay. And I show it this way, and he shows it that way. And my
cute.
mom loves receiving both of those.
Mm,
It's really nice, his confidence in knowing we don't have to do it the same way, and it doesn't mean we don't love our mom.
yeah, totally.
And what it reminded me of too is he's my oldest has never been one of many words of affirmation or words of love. He's not that mushy, let me tell you how much I love you all the time kind of kids. He's very pragmatic and logical and factual. And so sometimes I'm not expecting that he feel not that I don't think he feels love deeply, but I'm not expecting him to express in this way or that this is a nice way for him to show love. So it reminds me too of this question, are we willing to see people for who they are in the moment? Are we willing to let people surprise us? Because he surprised me in that moment. And it was so lovely. And are we willing to see people through a different lens than the one we already have of them?
Mm-hmm.
And that was just a sweet, sweet in the car on the drive to school moment.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah. Yeah, they are two really different kids with really different ways of expressing. Such a microcosm of like our entire group of friends and family. Everyone's going to have these different ways. Have
Mm-hmm.
we talked about love languages? I don't think we really have.
We touched on it a bit, I think, last episode. We didn't go
Yeah.
tons into it, I don't think.
Yeah. I think it's such an easy funk to fall into, the wanting to be loved in our particular way. You know, when we start relationships with people and we're at like peak curiosity and peak paying attention and we're noticing everything and we're hearing and seeing everything. So we start to fall back into our patterns and our routines. We might not recognize the love that's coming towards us if it's not through the lens of our preferred love language or what our experience of love has been.
And this is what the mom and the fruit is all about. Oh my goodness.
You want to tell that story now?
Yeah, I'll tell that story now.
Mom fruit.
Mom and fruit. So I'm thinking of how I want to tell that story, how I want to frame this story. Let's just say I grew up in a way where I wanted my parents to express their love through words of affirmation and through physical touch, hugs and I love yous. And they were really great at providing for my practical needs. And I think a little bit unaware of what a child needed or I needed in terms of having my emotional needs met. So, one of the things I always felt I lacked from my parents was that, oh, having a hard time. It's okay to cry. Come, I'm here with you. It makes sense that you feel sad, or it makes sense that you feel angry or jealous. I really wanted to be met on that emotional level and didn't really feel that they could or that they did. And it brought up a lot of, I think, resentment on my part. And I think it brought up a lot of frustration on their part because they're like, we're doing all these things to love you. All the practical things are taken care of. What do you have to complain about? And so they were loving me in the ways they knew how, like so hard and so much. And I was not feeling loved at all. And it's one of the reasons why I got into this work, because, and working with families especially, that's where my career started in this field, because it made me so sad to know that so many parents love their children
Mm.
so much, and their children are wanting to feel loved so much, and there's just like a crisscross of wires and it's not coming through.
Yeah.
And it causes years and years of disconnection and resentment and hurt feelings on both sides, that are full of incorrect assumptions,
Yes.
right? That I'm not loved, or they don't love me and they don't see me. And so, leading to the story, how I really knew that this work was working was, I'm going to take us back to, where are we now? Will be almost 3 years now. This is a bit of a sad story, so I want to just let people know that we're going to talk about some maybe hard to hear things. And I might take my time in telling the story, because feelings and things and sensations will come up for me. But I think it's a really beautiful story to tell. So I want to share it. Whew. Um, Almost 3 years ago, it was shortly after my ex and I split up. He died by suicide. And that was a shock. And it was a really, really tough time, as you could imagine. For my kids, he was like a bonus dad. So this was grief on so many levels for us as a family. And this is a little story about how my mom and dad showed me love during that time. And what I have to tell you is that, because of a difficult relationship with my parents growing up and feeling like they couldn't hold the emotional stuff, when I was 16 years old, I decided I'm never going to tell you anything. Because if I tell you things about feeling sad, you tell me it's not a big deal. If I tell you I feel angry, I get in trouble for being angry. If I share my excitement with you, I get to hear all about your fears about why it might not work. And so I think I felt really defeated and done as a 16-year-old, and really decided and made the declaration, I'm never telling you anything again. And from that point on, I really didn't say much to them other than the things that had to be said. And I remember years later in counseling, my counselor helped me see, she said, you made a declaration at that point in your life to never share with them again. If you feel that that still serves you, then hold on to that. But if you're starting to see that you might not need that level of protection, you might not need that level of disconnection from them, maybe you want to create a new declaration. So at first, I probably made a face. I don't know what you're talking about. But I think deep down, I knew, like, I don't want to live by that declaration forever. I want to have a closer relationship with my parents. I want to be able to share things with them. And I might have adjusted that declaration to something along the lines of, I'm learning to slowly open up more to my parents.
Mm-hmm.
And that was actually a long journey. It wasn't like overnight. It wasn't even over a couple years. It's taken years to get to the point where I feel more free to open up and not so concerned about how they'll respond or how they won't respond. And I've learned to not take it personally.
Mm.
But how it ties into the story is that this man died, Daryl died, and I didn't tell my parents. Like, I didn't tell them for quite some time, a month or two. I don't know. Like, the hugest thing in my life that was going on. The biggest thing that was going on for my children, their grandchildren. And I didn't tell them because I wasn't ready to. I didn't know what response would come. I think I just needed to be in my own little space with my small little circle. It was also during COVID. So we weren't really seeing people that often. And one day my mom called and I answered her call. And she asked me, of course, she said, "Oh, how are you?" And I remember distinctly the moment. I was like, oh, I could either lie or I could tell her how I actually am. And lying to her and telling her, oh, I'm fine, I'm just busy with work and life, would have been a thing I would have done in the past because I don't want to go to those emotional places with her, or I didn't want to. And something in my body said, don't do that anymore. You don't actually want to do that. You want to practice sharing more with your mother. You want to practice letting her see you more fully. And so I told her, I said, Daryl and I split up, and also he died. And she was very lovely. I don't remember exactly what she said anymore, but I do remember I could feel her love. I could feel her care. I could feel her concern for me and wanting me to know, or wanting me to feel supported and okay, and wondering how my children were doing. And we had a nice conversation. Wasn't too long, but it was really important because I felt her love, which I think I've couldn't feel her love for a long time. Then I resisted feeling her love for a long time, and this time I let myself really receive it. And then she proceeded, the conversation got a little lighter. And then she proceeded to say, can I buy you some fruit? Would you like some fruit? And my immediate response, I think, was something like, yes, strawberries and mangoes, please. Thank you. And that sounds like no big deal, but it is such a big deal because I've only recently discovered now that that was one of the ways my parents, and I think actually many Chinese parents, show their love to their children. It's buying them fruit. My parents used to, and I didn't actually realize this was an act of love. They used to peel oranges for me at like after dinner before bedtime. This when I was a kid. And they'd be all sectioned off nicely, like
Oh,
all the white stuff would be taken off.
oh wow.
They would be cut up, and my dad would choose the juiciest oranges and really be proud, like this is a really good orange, like a good orange.
Oh,
And I think the oranges had little toothpicks in them.
oh my
And
gosh.
I wasn't able to see that that was an act of love.
Mm.
And actually, the reason I realized this was an act of love, it feels silly to say it now. I am in one of these Facebook groups. It's called Subtle Asian Traits. And it's just people talking about their Asian upbringing. And, you laugh and you cry together. And someone made a comment. It wasn't even a main thread, it was someone's comment on one of the threads that said, yeah, that's how our parents show their love, with
Wow.
sliced oranges. What?
So specific.
So specific. And then it reminded me of like the apples that my mom cut up for me and put
Mm.
toothpicks in. And so, how this ties to the story is that for years, my mom will say, how are you? Have you eaten?
Mm.
Wear a coat. Don't forget to wear a coat. Or let me buy you some grapes. And I was like, I'm fine. I don't need a coat. I'm not cold. I don't need grapes. I'm fine. Right. And what I really wanted was to hear, I love you and I'm here for you. And how are you feeling about this thing that happened? Oh, that makes sense. And that sounds really hard. Like I wanted that kind of emotional support and validation. And when they would offer me these practical things,
Mm.
it would just make my blood boil because
Mm.
every time they would have offered, I would have tried to tell them something and they would have come back with something practical. I think I either outwardly rolled my eyes or just energetically rolled my eyes. And I was like, see, they don't get me. They're never
Mm-hmm.
me. They're never going to love me the way I need to be loved, and screw them. And this is a hopeless relationship,
Right.
right? And that's what I used to think. So that day when I was talking to my mom, when she offered to buy me fruit, right after I told her something that was really, really hard, and I could say, yes, please, thank you. Thanks, Mom.
Mm.
And feel her love in that offer of buying fruit. I was like, huh, something's changed.
Wow.
And it was such a beautiful feeling. I knew that something significant had been happening and like it was coming to fruition.
Mm.
And the other part of that was my dad. I think my mom handed the phone to my dad. I don't even remember who I spoke to first. But my dad has always been very pragmatic, very logical. And I told him, and he said something like, well, then maybe it was for the best because he's not in pain anymore, right? If he felt the need to do that, he must have been suffering a lot and in a lot of pain. And so maybe we can sort of just rest in the knowing that he doesn't have to live that way anymore, which is a very, logical way to think about things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, again, in the past, I would have felt like, you're not getting it. Why would you say that to me? I feel so sad right now.
Yeah.
I don't want to think about that part of it. I just feel really sad. I want you to listen to me cry, you know? But he wanted to give this piece of life wisdom or perspective or logical explanation.
Mm.
And in that moment, when he said the words that he said, again, I could feel his love. I could feel, oh, this is how daddy loves me. This is how my dad loves me by helping me see the other side,
Yeah.
right? And in the past, I would have seen it as he doesn't get me. Why the F would he say this? This is so inappropriate. And I would have like added that to the evidence that this man is never going to get me.
Right.
And in that moment, I felt really loved and supported by my dad. And that's again when I realized, oh, things have changed.
Wow. Are you
Yeah.
able to identify, maybe at the time or in hindsight now, what shifts had happened within you that made room for that?
Yeah. I think, like I was saying sort of at the beginning of this episode, it was a long journey to this place.
Mm.
And I think some of the things that helped along the way were acknowledging the things that I wish I had as a kid, acknowledging the ways I wish,
Mm.
acknowledging the ways I wished that my parents could show their love to me
Yeah.
as a child, and acknowledging the impact it had on me
Mm-hmm.
to not receive love in those ways, and how hurt and misunderstood and confused I felt. Right. So just an acknowledgement of experience.
Sorry.
So an acknowledgement of my experience and also the healing work around that. The inner child healing work of how devastating it felt as a little girl to want to share my sadness or my anger, or my jealousy or my excitement with my parents and feeling like they couldn't really be there in it with me.
Yeah.
Couldn't reassure me in with warmth and holding, a physical holding, but also an emotional and energetic holding. And how hard that was for me because essentially I don't feel that I grew up with any adult figures who I could go to and freely share my inner world with. And that's tough as a kid. There's a lot going on that you're trying to make sense of as a kid to not have a single adult you feel like you can share your inner world with.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that healing work is important. And then the next piece that I think was so crucial was creating. relationships, trusting and safe relationships and community and friendships where I could receive those things that I needed
Mm-hmm.
from my parents. Right? We joined women's group, and every week for years, that's what we practiced. Sharing how we felt, having, sharing our needs, having that witnessed and acknowledged and held, and people to reassure us that those needs make sense and those feelings make sense and they're valid. And
Mm-hmm.
everything I felt I wanted to hear from my parents, I got to hear from this group of women, from this group of people, and from CRT when we did conscious relationship training. More of that, right? More of what experiencing I can share my truth and
Mm-hmm.
people still accept me.
Can you say a bit about, so it's so easy now to say, we've got these feelings and needs and here's my truth.
Mhm.
I, for one, was nowhere close to that when we started this work. Like, someone
Mhm.
handed me a feelings wheel. I'll put a link to the feelings wheel. I was like, but there are like 800 feelings on this wheel. I don't have these things. And it took years of work to discover what feelings I had, what feelings I needed met, what feelings I think were not meant as a child, not met, rather.
What really helped me is I dove deep in nonviolent communication and had great mentors and teachers in that realm. And that's where I had my first, like, I would say, feelings and needs 101, because I
Mm.
also had no idea. I was like, I don't know, happy, sad, angry. Are there any more feelings? I don't know. And um, I remember, so I think in Marshall Rosenberg, his book about nonviolent communication, there's a feelings and needs list. So I
Mm.
actually printed them out, like on paper. I had them on my kitchen island. And I remember one of the things that I did was I started circling the feelings that I had this week or this month that I was aware of. At
Mm.
the beginning, the circles, like, there's not that many because I don't even know them. Right? I remember reading the list of all the possibilities. I'm like, all of those feelings. And then I'd start thinking, oh, I remember a time where I think it was something like this. Right? It was so foreign, but that's
Mm.
where it started. And there was a needs list. I'm like, oh, this need. Okay. Connection. I can imagine what that is, but I'd just go through the needs list. And some of them were easy to understand. Some I was like, don't know really what that is.
Mhm.
And that's how it started. It was like a child learning a foreign language.
Yeah, for sure.
And I remember at the time, with my ex husband, we were married at the time. And I remember trying to practice this stuff. Because ideally, you can just say it in the moment, hey, you just said this thing and that hurts, like, that hurts my feelings, it makes me feel sad to hear you use those words to talk about me. And, would you be, are you okay just choosing some different words, some softer words, right? I couldn't really say that stuff.
Mm.
So what I would do is, after the fact, I remember, let me just write down all the things that pissed me off this week about you. And so I wrote them down. And then I used the feelings list. And, like, okay, so what was I feeling? What happened? And then how was I feeling? And then
Mhm.
I put the feelings list to the side and I picked up the needs list. Okay, what was I
Mhm.
needing? Why did it feel that way? What was I needing? And I wrote it down. And then in NVC, they use a certain structure. And I think the last part is like asking, making a request for something. Are you willing to, right? Would you be willing to? And I'd be like, okay, would you be willing to? And I'd fill it out like on this piece of paper.
Mm.
And that's how I became aware of what's going on for me. Like, why did I flip out? Why was I so hurt? Why was I so angry? And so it was a great practice in understanding myself.
Mhm.
And the next part is like trying to communicate that with someone. And I
Mm.
knew, I'm like, I don't know this stuff. It feels so clunky. I don't get it enough to just tell you it, even though it's after the fact. So I think I said to him, I'd like to share with you how I've been feeling this week. Can you make some time for that?
Hmm.
He agreed and whatever. And so then I sat there with my piece of paper and I said, I can't really just say this stuff, so I'm just going to read it to you. And so
Great.
that's what I did. And I read it to him. And he was like, oh, that makes so much sense. I get it.
Mm.
Okay.
Ah, yeah. We understand each other's feelings generally.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
how a lot of us are conditioned to communicate is with a lot of blame and judgment thrown
for
towards the
sure.
person. So
Yeah.
naturally, their defenses come up.
Yeah. I actually want to say something about that and nonviolent communication. Because I went into nonviolent communication work a lot when I was doing social work in like, this must have been like 2009. I probably did my first nonviolent communication workshop. And because I was so disconnected from my feelings and egoic, I was unconsciously pretty controlling person. I co-opted nonviolent communication language framework to describe what I thought were feelings and what I thought were reasonable requests because they were worded the way that the workshop told me to word them. But and I don't want to denounce that. That was still very useful to identify my feelings. But when I got deeper into personal responsibility and radical honesty and vulnerability, like when I was able to reach some real vulnerable spots,
Mm-hmm.
I could feel the difference between something like the language I would have used from nonviolent communication before would have been like, when you say X, I feel like that's a cue. As soon as you say like, you're out of the realm of feelings and back into your head. I
Feel like
feel
you.
like you don't love me. And what I need is for you to do or be completely different, is basically, right? Um, but then to deepen that to, what I actually feel is unloved, even that still has the tiniest bit of blame. I feel unlovable is
Mhm.
complete ownership of that feeling and just like the simplest, deepest true thing in that moment.
Yeah,
So,
and like I believe myself to be unlovable, and
yeah,
that leaves me feeling sad, right? There's like all these layers of nuance that as we are willing to know ourselves more deeply, we can go to that place. But that
yeah,
takes time.
it does.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's how I learned about feelings and needs. And it was tons of practice, so much
Mm,
practice. And then it became practicing how do I acknowledge that I have these needs and not shame myself for them? And then how do I practice starting to give some of these to myself? So, what I really wanted from my parents was for them to say, it makes sense that you feel this way, and I'm here for you. And so I practiced saying that to myself. Makes sense that you feel this way. And I would like place a hand on my body. Makes sense that you feel this way. That was really hard. And I'm here with you.
that
Right?
sounds so simple and basic. And if I go back into my usual thinking instead of doing mind, I'm like, yeah, well, that's nice. Of course you do. Of course people feel that way. We shouldn't even need to say it out loud. But the moment someone says that out loud to me, the dam breaks. It's such an impactful thing to just say, wow, it makes sense that you feel that way. That must be hard for you, and I'm here for you.
Yeah. And really, like anytime someone's having a hard time, like sometimes we get all flustered and tied up in knots of what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to say? How do I help them? Most people just want either words like that or an energy or a presence that conveys that,
Yeah,
right? You're not crazy and wrong. This is hard, and I'm here with you.
yeah. I remember when we started leading the Thursday women's group, and I think they had recently handed over the reins to us, and I still had part of my mind feeling like things I needed to be a certain way and do things a certain way, and like there was some script I could follow. And one of the women shared something really intense that had happened with her in our group chat. And I messaged Shalina. I was like, something has happened. What do I say? What do I do? And she's like, oh, well, just let her know you love her and that it's okay. Oh, so simple. Of
So
course.
simple,
Yeah.
right? That's ultimately what we want,
Yeah.
right? One of my nonviolent communication teacher. She's a brilliant woman, Sarah Payton. She is also like understands like brain science like no other, just a genius in my mind, but an attachment. And I learned a lot of my attachment work through her. And I forget how many times a minute, a second this is happening. She will know the number, but we are constantly asking ourselves, am I safe? Do I matter? And we're scanning all the time. Am I safe? Do I matter? Am I like physically safe? Yes. Am I emotionally safe? And do I matter? Right. And essentially, what Shalina was saying to you is, are you able to convey to this person who's going through a hard time that in this connection with you, in this group, there's an emotional safety here and that she matters, right? And emotional safety meaning whatever you feel, it's welcome here. And we will be with you through it.
Yeah,
And that makes all the difference.
it sure does. Yeah. So that, okay, I took a note when you were talking earlier because I'm thinking about that and moms and what a different role it is, you know? Women in a supportive women's group who the whole point of being there is to let people know they're safe and they matter and that we see them
Yeah.
and that they're welcome. That's not the role of a mom, quite, you know? This makes me think of when we talk about positive intelligence, when we do Shirzed Shamin's wonderful positive intelligence work. And you get in judge brain, right? He talks about the different mindsets that we have. And when you're in judge brain, or the brain that's designed to notify us of problems that might occur, that is not the same section of your brain as the brain that's just there to be creative or offer love or support. Maybe you can say a bit about that, especially as a mom.
As a mom, I mean, as a person in relationship, as a person who's a mom, I think it's really important to notice when I'm in judge brain, judge mode. Or my judge is really loud. And if you take a nervous system perspective, our judge voice is just letting us know I'm dysregulated. I cannot access my curiosity and my empathy for you right now. And as a mom in particular, it's very important to notice when I'm in judge mode and when I'm in like fear mode, right? Of hypersensitive, hyper alert to all the things that could go wrong. Because when you try to parent from those places, your children are guaranteed to feel like they're not being met in that moment, no matter how much we love them, right? And that's the sad thing is I was telling a mom that I was working with yesterday, I said, I don't want your love for your children to go to waste. I can see how much you and your husband love your children. But when you're not regulated, when you're dysregulated, you're not able to convey to your children that love that's just so true and so deeply there. And your children cannot feel your love, right? So, one of the things that's going to be really important for you to work on is growing your ability to regulate your nervous system.
Yes. Can we pin right there and continue this next week? Because we're at 40 minutes. We got to do a closing practice. And I think we could talk about this for a long time.
Sounds good. We can do that.
Okay. You have a body practice in mind that you want to do?
Um, Let me think about it. Yeah. So let's place hand on body somewhere, anywhere where it feels good. And just feel your anchoring spot again, whether that's feet or butt. Notice your breath and just add a little gentle side to side sway and see how that feels. And you might feel like that feels good, so I'm going to keep doing it. Or you might notice that doesn't feel good and I don't want to do it. So let yourself stop. And choose a pace and a range of motion if you are moving that feels good for you. And that piece is really important because it's symbolic, because a lot of us move through life at the pace of other people, or the pace that we think other people think that we should move at. So it's important to practice sensing what pace feels good for me right now and learning to honor that. Because the simple practice of moving at a pace that feels good for me is going to translate at some point into what I say yes to, what I say no to, how fast I want to be moving, what kind of a break I need. Yeah.
Yes. And taking this moment with ourselves is a regulated moment.
Yeah.
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 Wonderful. Okay. Well, we'll be back next week with more. In the meantime, please do share. We're getting lots of wonderful feedback from people, and I'm so happy to know that this is helping everyone. So, we need help with algorithms and letting people know and all that stuff. So please do like, follow, and subscribe. And if anything we have said here today has been helpful for you, please share with somebody you care about.
Yes. Thank you. See you next time.
Yeah.